The conference room smelled like stale coffee and broken promises. My boss Martin Hale stood at the head of the mahogany table, his smile sharp as a knife blade. Across from us sat Marcus Thompson, our biggest client, waiting for the quarterly report that would determine whether his company renewed our $1 million contract. "The numbers look fantastic," Martin announced, sliding the doctored report across the polished surface. "Profit margins increased by 18%, exactly as projected." My stomach twisted. Those numbers were lies. The real margins had dropped by 12%. I had spent 3 sleepless nights trying to find ways to present the truth diplomatically, but Martin wanted fiction. He wanted me to paint a beautiful picture over an ugly reality. Marcus nodded approvingly, but I caught the slight furrow in his brow. He was a smart businessman who had built his empire on careful analysis. Something felt wrong to him too. "Actually," I interrupted, my voice cutting through Martin's sales pitch like glass, "I need to clarify something about those figures." Martin's smile froze. The room went silent except for the hum of the air conditioning, and my heart beat thundering in my ears. "The actual margins," I continued, pulling out my laptop and opening the real spreadsheet, "declined by 12% this quarter, due to increased operational costs and market volatility." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes sharpening with interest rather than disappointment. Martin's face had gone pale, then red, like a traffic light stuck between caution and rage. "I appreciate honesty," Marcus said quietly, his gaze moving between Martin and me. "Too many consultants tell me what they think I want to hear." Martin forced a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Natalie here is being overly cautious. These numbers require context." "The context is right here," I said, turning my laptop screen toward Marcus. "Raw data unfiltered. Your company is still profitable, but we need to address these challenges honestly." The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Martin's jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Marcus was studying the screen with the intensity of a surgeon examining an X-ray. Finally Marcus spoke. "This is exactly the kind of analysis I pay for. Reality, not fantasy." After Marcus left, promising to review the real numbers and get back to us, Martin closed the conference room door with deliberate calm. The click echoed like a gunshot in the sudden silence. 9 years, he said, his voice low and dangerous. 9 years I've invested in you, Natalie Pierce. And this is how you repay me." I stayed seated, my hands folded on the table, projecting a confidence I didn't feel. I gave him accurate information. "Isn't that what consulting is supposed to be about?" Martin laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Consulting is about keeping clients happy and contracts renewed. You just cost us $1 million account with your moral grandstanding." "I prevented us from committing fraud," I replied evenly. "There's a difference." His eyes narrowed to slits. "Clean out your desk. You're fired." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. Standing slowly, I gathered my papers with steady hands. If honesty is bad for business, maybe I'm in the wrong business. I walked out of that room with my head high, even though my knees felt like water. Security escorted me to my desk like I was a criminal. The entire office pretended to work while watching from their peripheral vision. I could feel their mixture of sympathy and relief. Sympathy for my situation. Relief that it wasn't happening to them. My personal belongings fit into one small cardboard box. A framed photo of my graduation day, my lucky coffee mug, a small succulent plant that had somehow survived 3 years of fluorescent lighting. 9 years of my professional life reduced to items that could fit under one arm. "You'll receive your final paycheck and severance information by email," the security guard said, not unkindly. He was just doing his job, like I had been. As we walked toward the elevator, I passed Martin's glass office. He was on the phone, gesturing wildly, probably already spinning the story to minimize the damage. Through the glass, our eyes met for a brief moment. His expression was triumphant, like he had just solved a problem that had been bothering him for months. The elevator doors closed, and my career at Hale & Associates ended with the soft ding of the ground floor button. My apartment felt smaller that evening, like the walls had moved closer together while I was getting fired. I sat on my couch with a glass of wine, staring at the cardboard box on my coffee table. The succulent was already looking wilted, as if it sensed the change in its circumstances. The silence was deafening. No phone calls from concerned colleagues. No text messages offering support. Just the sound of traffic outside my window, and the hum of my refrigerator. I realized that in 9 years of dedicated work, I had built exactly 0 meaningful relationships at the office. My laptop sat closed on the kitchen counter, still containing copies of every project I had ever worked on. Company policy said all files belonged to Hale and Associates, but I had always kept backup copies for my own records. It was a habit my father had taught me. Always document your work, Natalie. You never know when you'll need to prove what you've done. At the time, I thought he meant for performance reviews. Now I was beginning to understand there might be other uses for careful documentation. I opened the laptop and started scrolling through folders of files. What I discovered in those files made my blood run cold. For the past 2 years, Martin had been systematically doctoring reports for multiple clients, not just Marcus Thompson. Numbers were inflated, risks were minimized, and problems were buried under layers of creative accounting. The pattern was consistent across 12 different client accounts. Profit margins exaggerated by an average of 15%. Risk assessments downgraded from high to moderate. Market projections inflated beyond any reasonable forecast. It was like finding a tumor that had been growing undetected for years. My hands trembled as I created a new folder on my desktop, Documentation. I began copying files, organizing them by client and date, building a timeline of deception that stretched back 24 months. Each falsified report was another nail in Martin's professional coffin, if anyone cared enough to look. The most damning evidence was in the metadata. Every document showed Martin's user ID as the last person to edit critical sections. He had been personally changing my honest assessments to more palatable lies, then presenting them as my work. I worked until 3 in the morning, fueled by anger and a growing sense of purpose. Sleep was impossible. I made coffee at dawn and continued building my case against Martin, but something else was forming in my mind. A different kind of plan. What if I didn't just expose him? What if I proved that honesty could actually be more profitable than lies? I researched Marcus Thompson's company, diving deep into their industry challenges, their market position, their competitive advantages. The real numbers I had shown him weren't just accurate. They revealed opportunities that Martin's fake optimism had hidden. There were solutions to their problems, strategies to turn weaknesses into strengths. By noon, I had drafted a comprehensive analysis that addressed every issue honestly while proposing concrete solutions. It was the kind of consulting work I had always wanted to do, but had never been allowed to complete. It was consulting based on reality instead of fantasy. My finger hovered over Marcus Thompson's phone number for 10 minutes before I finally dialed. Marcus Thompson's office, his assistant answered. This is Natalie Pierce. I worked on Mr. Thompson's account at Hale and Associates. I was wondering if he might have a few minutes to discuss the quarterly analysis. There was a pause. Let me check his calendar. Marcus agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown, away from his office and definitely away from Martin's influence. I arrived early, choosing a corner table where we could speak privately. My laptop bag felt heavy with the weight of what I was about to propose. He walked in exactly on time, scanning the room until he spotted me. Marcus Thompson was shorter than he appeared in meetings, with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had built a business from nothing and survived every economic storm the market could throw at him. Natalie, he said, settling into the chair across from me. I have to admit, I'm curious. It's not often someone calls me directly after being fired for telling the truth. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. You know about that? Word travels fast in our industry, he said with a slight smile. Martin called to apologize for your unprofessional behavior and assure me that he would personally handle my account going forward. My heart sank. Martin had already begun damage control, painting me as the problem while positioning himself as the solution. Marcus leaned back in his chair. That's when I knew you had been telling the truth. Martin's apology confirmed what I suspected during that meeting. Marcus continued. Those original numbers felt too good to be true. When someone fires the person who contradicts them, it usually means the contradiction was accurate. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by opportunity. Marcus, what if I told you that the real numbers actually reveal possibilities that the fake ones hide? I opened my laptop and turned it toward him. Your company's challenges are real, but they're also solvable. The declining margins are due to 3 specific factors, each of which can be addressed with targeted strategies. For the next hour, I walked him through my analysis. Real problems, real solutions, real projections based on achievable goals. Marcus asked sharp questions, challenged my assumptions, and tested my logic. By the end of our conversation, his expression had shifted from curious to interested to genuinely excited. This is exactly the kind of consulting I need, he said finally. Analysis that helps me solve problems instead of pretending they don't exist. He paused, studying my face. Are you thinking of starting your own firm? The question hung in the air between us. Was I? That evening, I sat in my apartment with Marcus's business card on my coffee table, and a decision to make. Starting a consulting firm required capital I didn't have, experience I wasn't sure I possessed, and courage I wasn't certain I could muster. But I also knew something else. I was good at what I did. Martin had fired me for my integrity, not my incompetence. The work I had shown Marcus was the best analysis I had ever produced, precisely because it was honest. I opened my laptop and began researching business registration requirements. Pierce Consulting had a nice ring to it. Simple, professional, honest. Everything my work with Martin had not been. My phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus Thompson. Been thinking about our conversation. Call me tomorrow. I have a proposal. I stared at the message for a long time, then saved his number in my phone under future client number 1. The next morning, I called the state business registration office. By afternoon, Pierce Consulting officially existed as a legal entity. It consisted of 1 employee, 1 laptop, and an apartment home office, but it was mine. Marcus's proposal was simple and terrifying. A 6-month consulting contract to help his company navigate the challenges we had discussed. The fee was substantial enough to cover my living expenses while I built the business, but more importantly, it was validation that honest consulting could be profitable. I'm tired of paying for pretty lies, he explained during our follow-up call. I want someone who will tell me what I need to hear, not what I want to hear. The irony was perfect. The same trait that had gotten me fired was now landing me my first client. I accepted the contract immediately, then spent the next week preparing. I researched his company's industry, analyzed their competitors, and developed a comprehensive strategy for addressing their operational challenges. Every recommendation was backed by solid data and realistic projections. My first client meeting as an independent consultant took place in Marcus's corner office, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I was nervous but prepared, armed with honesty and detailed analysis. This is impressive work, Marcus said after reviewing my presentation. How long would this kind of analysis have taken at Hale & Associates? 3 months, I admitted, but we would have spent most of that time figuring out how to make bad news sound good. He laughed. And how long did this take you? 1 week. Turns out, telling the truth is much more efficient than hiding it. Word traveled quickly through Marcus's professional network. Within a month, I had 3 more clients, all referrals from satisfied customers who appreciated honest analysis over optimistic fiction. Each project reinforced my belief that integrity wasn't just morally right. It was strategically smart. My apartment office was becoming crowded with client files and presentation materials. I was working longer hours than I ever had at Hale & Associates, but the work felt different. Meaningful. Every report I wrote reflected my actual analysis rather than Martin's political agenda. The most satisfying moment came when Marcus called to report that implementing my recommendations had resulted in a 12% increase in operational efficiency. The problems I had identified honestly were being solved systematically, leading to real improvements in his bottom line. You've saved us more money in 2 months than Hale & Associates did in 2 years, he told me. I'm recommending you to everyone I know. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at an upscale restaurant I had never been able to afford on my corporate salary. As I sat alone at a table for one, reviewing contracts for my growing business, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: professional satisfaction. My success apparently wasn't going unnoticed. Martin called me on a Tuesday morning, his voice carefully controlled, but unable to hide an underlying tension. "Natalie, I think we need to have a conversation." "About what?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. "I'm hearing rumors that you're poaching our clients. That's not just unethical, it's potentially illegal depending on the non-compete clause in your employment contract." I pulled out my copy of the contract and flipped to the relevant section. "Actually, Martin, the non-compete only applies if I was terminated for cause. Since you fired me for refusing to falsify reports, that would be considered wrongful termination, which voids the non-compete." Silence. I could practically hear him grinding his teeth. "Besides," I continued, "I'm not poaching anyone. They're coming to me because they want honest analysis instead of creative fiction." "Listen carefully," Martin said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "If you continue interfering with my business, I will make sure you never work in this industry again." "Good luck with that," I replied calmly. Hard to blacklist someone whose reputation is built on telling the truth. I hung up and immediately called my lawyer. The legal consultation was enlightening. Not only was my non-compete clause unenforceable under the circumstances of my termination, but Martin's systematic falsification of reports could constitute fraud if it had influenced client investment decisions. "Do you have documentation of these falsified reports?" my lawyer asked. I thought of the folders on my laptop, the careful timeline I had built during those sleepless nights after being fired. "Yes. Extensive documentation." "Then you're not just protected from his threats, you're in a position to file complaints with the state licensing board if you choose to." I left that meeting with a new understanding of my situation. I wasn't just a fired employee trying to rebuild her career. I was someone with evidence of professional misconduct by a licensed consulting firm. The power dynamic had shifted in ways Martin didn't yet realize. That afternoon, I received 2 more client referrals and a call from a business journal requesting an interview about ethical consulting practices in a competitive market. The reporter's first question made me smile. "Is it true that you were fired for refusing to lie to a client?" "Yes," I answered. "And it was the best thing that ever happened to my career." Number 15. The article came out the following week with the headline, "Fired for Ethics: How One Consultant Turned Integrity into Success." It featured a photo of me in my small apartment office, surrounded by client files and authentic analysis reports. The piece quoted Marcus Thompson extensively. "Natalie Pierce does something rare in consulting. She tells you what you need to know instead of what you want to hear. That honesty has been worth more to my company than years of optimistic projections." Martin's response, when contacted for comment, was telling. Ms. Pierce was terminated for insubordination. "We stand behind our professional standards and client service record." The article's author had done her homework, noting that 3 former Hale and Associates clients had switched to Pierce Consulting in the past 2 months, citing more accurate analysis and practical recommendations. My phone started ringing before I finished reading the article. New client inquiries, speaking engagement requests, and calls from other consultants who had similar stories about being pressured to manipulate reports for client relations. By the end of that week, I had to rent actual office space. My apartment wasn't big enough for my growing business. The office I rented was small but professional, with space for a conference table and file cabinets for my expanding client base. On the wall behind my desk, I hung my business license and a framed copy of the Business Journal article. Not for ego, but as a reminder of why I was doing this work. Marcus helped me celebrate by bringing coffee and pastries to my office opening. "I have something for you," he said, pulling out an envelope. "A bonus for exceeding expectations on the first project, and a retainer for year 2. The amount was more than I had made in my best year at Hale and Associates. More importantly, it represented validation that honest consulting was not just viable, it was profitable. "There's something else," Marcus continued. I've been talking to the board members of the Regional Business Association. They want to offer you a position on the ethics committee. I stared at him. 6 months ago, I had been fired for ethical behavior. Now I was being asked to help establish ethical standards for the entire industry. The meeting is next Thursday, Marcus said. They specifically requested that you present your approach to client honesty as a competitive advantage. Life had become beautifully ironic. The ethics committee meeting was held in a boardroom that reminded me uncomfortably of the place where Martin had fired me. But this time, I was seated at the table as an expert, not an employee facing termination. The committee chair introduced me as a consultant who has built a successful practice based on radical honesty, and I spent an hour presenting my philosophy. Truth as a business strategy, integrity as a competitive advantage, and honesty as the foundation of sustainable client relationships. The questions were thoughtful and challenging. How do you deliver bad news without losing clients? How do you compete against firms that promise unrealistic results? How do you price honesty in a market that rewards optimism? My answers were drawn from 6 months of real experience. Clients value truth more than comfort once they understand the cost of self-deception. Bad news delivered with solutions is more valuable than good news that leads nowhere. And honesty costs less than the cleanup required when lies fall apart. At the end of the presentation, the committee voted unanimously to adopt my client honesty framework as a recommended standard for all association members. I walked out of that building feeling like I had just helped change an entire industry. The industry changes created unexpected consequences for Martin and Hale and Associates. When the Regional Business Association published their new ethical guidelines, based largely on my presentation, several of Martin's clients began asking pointed questions about the accuracy of their reports. I learned this from Elena Rodriguez, a former colleague who had taken over some of my old accounts after my termination. She called me on a Friday afternoon, her voice tight with worry. Natalie, I need to ask you something confidentially. Did Martin ever ask you to adjust the numbers in client reports? The question hung in the air between us. Elena was a good person trapped in a bad situation, trying to do honest work in a dishonest environment. Why do you ask? I replied carefully. Because I'm looking at reports you worked on last year, and the numbers don't match the source data. Not even close. If clients start asking for documentation. She didn't need to finish the sentence. If clients demanded to see the raw data behind Martin's optimistic projections, Hale and Associates would be exposed as a house of cards built on systematic fraud. Elena, I said gently, document everything. Keep copies. And consider whether you want to be there when it all falls apart. Elena's call was followed by similar conversations with 2 other former colleagues. Martin's pattern of falsifying reports was becoming impossible to hide as more clients adopted the association's new transparency standards. The first domino fell when Patterson Industries, one of Hale and Associates' oldest clients, terminated their contract after discovering that their risk assessments had been systematically understated for 3 years. The second domino was Riverside Manufacturing, who found 17 different inconsistencies between their reports and the underlying data. Each lost client represented hundreds of thousands in revenue. But more damaging was the growing reputation for dishonesty. In an industry built on trust, Martin was becoming known as someone who couldn't be trusted. Meanwhile, Pierce Consulting was thriving. I had hired 2 junior analysts and was interviewing candidates for a senior consultant position. My client base had grown to include companies that had never worked with Hale and Associates, drawn by word-of-mouth recommendations about honest analysis and practical solutions. The contrast was becoming stark. One firm built on lies was collapsing while another built on truth was growing. Justice, it turned out, had its own timeline. The end came faster than I expected. Martin called me on a Wednesday morning, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance and replaced with something that sounded almost like desperation. Natalie, we need to meet. There are things we should discuss. We met at the same coffee shop where Marcus and I had planned my consulting firm 6 months earlier. Martin looked older, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested sleepless nights and mounting pressure. I'll be direct, he said, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. Hale and Associates is in trouble. We've lost 6 major clients in 2 months, and there are rumors about an investigation by the state licensing board. I waited, saying nothing. I know you have documentation about our reporting practices, he continued. I'm prepared to offer you a partnership position and 50% ownership if you're willing to come back and help rebuild the firm's reputation. The offer was stunning in its desperation. 6 months ago, he had fired me for honesty. Now he was offering me half his company because he needed that same honesty to survive. Martin, I said quietly, I already own 100% of a firm built on integrity. Why would I want 50% of one built on lies? His face crumpled. For the first time since I had known him, Martin Hale looked defeated. 2 weeks later, Elena called with news that surprised no one in the industry, but shocked Martin to his core. The state licensing board had launched a formal investigation into Hale and Associates' reporting practices, prompted by complaints from multiple former clients. They're requesting all project files from the past 3 years, Elena reported. Martin's running around the office like a trapped animal, trying to figure out what to do with all the evidence of altered reports. The investigation moved swiftly once investigators had access to the files. Digital forensics revealed exactly what I had discovered in my apartment that night after being fired. A systematic pattern of falsified data, manipulated projections, and doctored risk assessments across dozens of client accounts. Martin's licensing was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. Without a licensed consultant to oversee operations, Hale and Associates was forced to cease business operations immediately. 9 years of building a firm based on lies had collapsed in 9 weeks of scrutiny based on truth. The local business journal ran a follow-up article titled, The Cost of Dishonesty: How One Firm's Ethical Failures Led to Its Downfall. My quote in that article became something of a rallying cry for honest business practices. Integrity isn't just the right thing to do, it's the only sustainable thing to do. A year after being fired from Hale and Associates, I was invited to speak at the Regional Business Association's annual conference. The topic was building sustainable success through ethical practice, and the audience included many of the same people who had watched me walk out of Martin's conference room in disgrace. My presentation focused on the business case for honesty, how truth-based consulting led to better client outcomes, stronger relationships, and more sustainable growth. I shared specific examples from my practice, showing how honest analysis had helped clients solve real problems and achieve measurable improvements. During the question period, someone asked about my former employer. What would you say to other professionals who feel pressured to compromise their ethics for business success? I thought about Martin, about the fear in his eyes during our final conversation, about the colleagues who had watched me get fired for doing the right thing. I would tell them that integrity has a compound interest, I answered. It might cost you something in the short term, but it pays dividends for the rest of your career. The applause was sustained and genuine. These weren't people applauding out of politeness. They were professionals who understood the daily pressure to cut corners and compromise principles. After my presentation, Marcus approached the stage. 1 year ago, you told the truth in a room where lies were expected. That moment of courage changed both our companies for the better. Pierce Consulting continued to grow, not just in size but in influence. We developed a reputation as the firm that told clients what they needed to hear, and that reputation attracted the kind of clients who valued substance over style, solutions over empty reassurances. My team had grown to 8 consultants, each selected not just for their technical skills, but for their commitment to ethical practice. We operated under a simple philosophy: truth first, clients second, profits third. Counterintuitively, this approach proved more profitable than Martin's lies-first strategy had ever been. The most satisfying project came when Patterson Industries, one of Martin's former clients, hired us to conduct a comprehensive audit of their operations. The same company that had terminated their contract with Hale and Associates due to falsified reports now trusted us to tell them the complete truth about their business. Our analysis revealed significant problems that Martin's optimistic reports had hidden for years. But it also identified specific solutions that could address those problems systematically. Patterson's CEO later told me it was the most valuable consulting work his company had ever received. For the first time in years, we know exactly where we stand and exactly what we need to do, he said. That kind of clarity is priceless. The irony was beautiful. By telling the truth about problems, we had helped solve them. 2 years after my termination, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. The return address was Martin's home address, not a business office. Inside was a handwritten note on personal stationery. Natalie, it read, I've spent the past year thinking about what went wrong with Hale and Associates and my career. I realize now that firing you was the beginning of the end. Not because you were wrong, but because you were right. I hope you can forgive an old fool who confused success with integrity. Your former boss, Martin. I read the letter 3 times, then filed it away in my desk drawer. Forgiveness was possible, but forgetting was unnecessary. The experience had taught me something valuable about the cost of compromising principles and the value of standing firm in your convictions. That same week, Pierce Consulting was named Consulting Firm of the Year by the Regional Business Association. The award citation specifically mentioned our commitment to honest analysis and ethical practice as the foundation of client service. Standing on the stage to accept the award, I thought about that conference room where Martin had fired me for telling the truth. The same trait that had ended one career had become the foundation of another. 5 years later, Pierce Consulting occupies an entire floor of a downtown office building. We employ 23 people and serve clients across 6 states. Our reputation for honest analysis has become our most valuable asset, attracting clients who are tired of being told what they want to hear instead of what they need to know. I still keep Martin's letter in my desk drawer, not as a trophy but as a reminder. A reminder that integrity isn't always convenient, isn't always comfortable, and isn't always immediately rewarded. But in the long run, it's the only foundation strong enough to build something meaningful upon. Yesterday, a young consultant from another firm called to ask for advice. She was being pressured to manipulate data in a client report, and she didn't know what to do. Her story sounded familiar. Tell the truth, I advised her. It might cost you a job, but it will save your career. This morning she called back. She had refused to falsify the report, been fired immediately, and wanted to know if Pierce Consulting was hiring. Come in this afternoon, I told her. Let's talk about the business case for honesty. The cycle continues, but now I'm on the other side of it, helping people understand that integrity isn't just the right choice, it's the smart choice. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's also the profitable choice.